Hello, everyone, and welcome to the next edition of the sales webinar series here at the Center for Professional Selling at Ball State University. I'm your host, Deva Rangarajan, and welcome back. Today, we have another fantastic person. We have Tim Sullivan from Sales Performance International, which is actually a big sales training and consulting organization. Where Tim is the corporate vice president of business development. So he's actually a salesperson who also happens to teach sales. So Tim, thank you so much for agreeing to be part of this webinar series.
Thanks, Dave. It's really a pleasure to be here today.
Absolutely. So Tim, I guess you're there in wonderful Georgia right now, and we are over here talking in Muncie. But I think one of the wonderful things about technology, which we'll come back to it later on, is how technology is enabling us to talk to each other. And there's a lot of talk right now about how technology right now is making it easier for the customers to do their homework online. You can go all the way from 57% of a buying decision is made, 77% of B2B buyers do their research before they talk to a sales rep. So what triggered me was something recently that I saw of your post, which talked about buyer aligned sales journeys. So can you tell me a little bit more about what this is, especially in the world of the technology and the way things are changing right now?
Absolutely. This is actually not a new idea. I mean, the idea of sales processes that align with buyer behavior and buyer preferences have been around for a long time. And in fact, wrote a book just a couple years ago called The Collaborative Sale. And there's a whole section in there where we talk about dynamic buyer aligned sales processes. But really, what I wrote recently, and what I think you may have seen, is the idea of mapping what people are more commonly calling buyer journeys to sales activity. This is a very simple idea, which is that different buyers, as they are looking at different things that they want to, solutions that they need for their business or for ways they're enhancing their own personal lives, doesn't matter whatever it is, there's a logical series of states that buyers go through, and we outlined a very simple model for that. And what we find, though, is that most sellers, even today, surprisingly, most of them tend to treat buyer-seller interactions in a very uniform fashion. And they may talk to a customer or a potential buyer who's very early in that buyer journey and treat them exactly the same as someone when they encounter when they're at the end of the buyer journey and they're just looking to validate price and making sure they can implement correctly. And that is a huge mistake. And it's this misalignment between buyers and sellers that often results in what we see most commonly in B2B decisions today, which is the decision to do nothing, to stay with the status quo, and to, we call it losses to no decision A. And it's, if we can simply train buyers and sellers, and mostly sellers, to understand where the buyer is in that journey and to align their behavior with where they are in a way that's actually going to create value for that buyer, then that will help them guide to a buying decision. And we see the top performing sellers being able to do that. Most of them do it intuitively without thinking, because it's based on their experience and their understanding of the different customers that they're trying to service and provide value to. But we find that it's a behavior that can be learned. And if you understand the model that buyers go through psychologically as they're making their decision and how you can support and sustain that, then that gives me a huge advantage as a seller. And that was really the main point. The second thing that we talked about is that increasingly that ability to develop that alignment with buyers and to maintain it is being facilitated more and more by technology. There's technologies that are available today to help sellers understand where a potential buyer actually is when they are engaging with them. Are they very early in a latent state, or are they very late, to the party, if they will, and therefore how do they need to adjust their behavior? Ways to get more intelligence about those buyers as they're engaging with them or before they engage with them, and also ways to communicate more effectively, and to help collaborate with buyers to guide them to a purchase decision that's going to create the most value at the lowest risk for them. So we see this lots of different technological advancement that are designed to help sellers to understand where buyers are and to help differentiate not only by what they sell, but how they engage with them.
Tim, I think it's very interesting you talk about this because what I feel sometimes, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, is that as much as you have this buyers doing their homework online, I personally think buyers are more confused than ever.
Yes.
Because for me, the whole aspect of when you wrote the aspect of dynamic sales, and in my opinion, would you agree that what is different from the time when you wrote that and what's happened right now is the buyers have gone ahead and done what other people have said. I've actually gone to internets and other sources to get different sources of information, except that now they come back more confused than ever. And so
Right.
essentially what we're talking about is if your salespeople were already not doing the dynamic nature of that relationship and how customers are changing, on top of it, now you also have a confused customer. So is that something that you agree with? Because that is what I think is happening. And that just makes the job of the salesperson even more difficult, doesn't it?
I totally agree. Just- this is, again, this is a trend that's not new, but it is certainly continuing to evolve and create more complexity. I mean, heck, this was all predicted back in 1999 when there was a book, a great book that's still relevant today, called the Clue Train Manifesto, that was published, where they talked about, hey, markets and buying decisions are conversations now, and they're conversations that happen not necessarily between a buyer and a seller. They're also buyers and other buyers or other customers,
Yeah.
competitive alternatives. And what's happened is, over the years, organizations that have things to sell, in particular marketing organizations, are now using a wide variety of content marketing
Yeah.
and kinds of techniques to flood the buyer with all kinds of information. And it just, they're overwhelmed by this now. So even though the buyers are doing more than half of the evaluation before they ever engage with solution providers, in most cases, not all, but in many cases, it's actually causes them to cause more, to have
Exactly. Yeah.
they're bombarded by all of this wealth of information that's coming from solution providers. So uh, getting clarity is one of the things that sellers can do for buyers now.
Yeah.
Help them filter through all of that in a way that where they can provide their expertise to say, well, yeah, I know you've gotten this information, that information, but here are the pieces that are really relevant to you and your situation.
Absolutely. Indeed.
And I think a lot of sellers miss that opportunity. They confuse more with better, as opposed to the right information that's tuned to that specific situation. And the information overload, I think, is causing enormous buyer confusion today.
Absolutely. Because for me, that's what I when I think about the aspect of it's not that the buyers are becoming less dynamic. They're becoming dynamic too. You're
Right.
becoming dynamic too. But the fact is that okay, the buyers now suddenly feel that there's a lot of information available. So you slowly catch up and then you are moving full ahead, but wait a minute, suddenly you have to actually stop and come back. That is what I
Right.
feel is happening, that salespeople, it took them some time to actually understand that you need to be much more dynamic, but then what happened, they went full stream, but then what happened, your buyers started getting confused, but
Yeah.
by now you've gone way past and now you might have to actually take a step back and you might have to go back and slow down a little bit and actually do the kind of things, because I personally think it's that fact that the salespeople have overshot, and as a result promising more to the customers, that leads to a lot of non-decisions being made
Yes.
because of the fact that not because salespeople are yet to catch up, actually they've gone way past, together with all the marketing collateral that comes up with that, suddenly the customer starts panicking saying, wait a minute, I went to this person with this kind of information and such problem that I have. This
Yeah.
person has given me more than maybe what I can chew, which goes back to what we've been saying all along, is that salespeople, despite knowing what is happening, have gone so much that they have to actually slow down again. I do not know if you agree with on that part as well.
I do agree with that. And I think um, the other related to that trend, David, is not only the information overload, which is really an opportunity for sales professionals to help. I mean, that's a way they can actually create value, to make sense of all of the wealth of information that buyers have. Gartner published an interesting study at the end of last year, and that is they have found for B2B decisions over the last 2 years, the number of people that are now involved in a purchase decision for an organization has increased by more than 30%, and that trend is increasing. And the reason people are doing that, well, first of all, it's collaborative technologies, and it may make that easier for people to do that, so they can bring people in. So not only do we have a buyer's journey, but we have people entering the buyer's journey at different steps, at different roles, and you end up with this kind of mishmash of different people. So as a salesperson, one of the main values that salespeople can bring to the table is the ability to act as somewhat of a corporate therapist now,
Yeah.
create
And
consensus of different buyer constituencies within the same organization to get them lined up to understand what perspectives are really relevant to the situation and get them to come to some sort of mutual decision. And that is extremely difficult.
absolutely.
But again, we're seeing technology helping salespeople, the ones that use it well, to help guide customers to a buying decision in a way that feels like they're mitigating their risk at the same time. So I totally agree with you. I think you see sellers having to pull back from the overload that customers have to deal with today, but they also have to deal with the increasing complexity,
Exactly.
the different constituencies that are involved in the decision.
Absolutely. I think that's what I think is interesting. So when you're trying to scale back, suddenly you find, wait a minute, I never talked to this person before.
Right.
And now suddenly, wait a minute, but I was not necessarily trained to come up with that kind of arguments. And I think it's great that you talk about it, because I think it's a nice segue into something that we had one of our guest speakers from last week, who was from a company called Showpad, which is, again, it's a sales enablement platform for the audience here. But I guess what Tim is saying lends itself very well to one of the technological advances is the concept of sales enablement platforms. Again, it's just a platform that at the end of the day is that we still need to understand that the sales process is changing, and how it is changing is what is going to be key to understanding whether you can rightfully implement the right kind of sales enablement platform. Is that correct?
I agree with that. The thing about that, there's a danger though with enablement technologies. And by the way, I love Showpad, and we use it internally as well.
Okay, yeah.
Collaborative features, and it's a wonderful thing. But a technology by itself, without some kind of app in a way that's going to help a salesperson know how and when to use it. So one of the things that we recommend to our customers, and that I wrote recently about and presented recently at the Sales 3.0 conference, is we recommend first is understand the different buyer constituencies that you work with and what are the steps of their buyer journey. Okay. And we provide a general model. I mean, there's a latent state, and then they evaluate, they then try to determine needs and evaluate alternatives, and then evaluate risk before making a purchase decision. And all buyer journeys have those components. Okay. Some of them take longer or shorter, some of them extremely short, some can be very long, depending on the strategic value of whatever solution they have. But they all go through those phases. And you can map out for different buyer constituencies what those look like and what the verifiable outcomes, the buyer behaviors that tell us that we're in alignment and adding value. So then regardless of whenever you engage with them, then you can align to their behavior. Now, the way that technologies like Showpad can help, or other sales enablement platforms, is that as I interact with a customer and I can say, okay, they're in this state, here are the pieces of information that are going to be highly relevant to them to solve this particular problem or create this, capitalize on this opportunity and create additional value. And now it makes sense for me. I know how to use that tool in a way that's going to provide value to that customer in a very timely fashion. What we often find is people will implement this technology and think that's the answer.
Yes.
Map it to buyer behavior, then they just populate it. I'll give you one example. There was one technology company that we worked with, and they implemented a sales enablement platform. It wasn't Showpad, but it was something similar. And they basically just populated it with almost 30,000 pieces of marketing collateral. And then they tried and went through this massive effort to tag all that content. Well, guess what? Salespeople used it not at all.
Yeah.
Because it was overwhelming. It didn't map to the buyer journeys that they were trying to provide support to, and they didn't know what quite to use. So could the technology support all of that? Absolutely. And can I find whatever I need there? Great. And the marketing department's pointing at it and saying, look, see all this value we're creating in the organization, and no one is using it.
Indeed.
In these cases, understanding the buyer journey, less is more. What are the key pieces that we need to help the buyer journey to the next step and the next step and the next step? It's going to be much more useful to sellers, and to do that in a collaborative fashion with the buyer. And that's to this. And I think that the technologies that are out now can be very helpful, but if you don't have a good map for success based on buyer behavior, then it's just a technology that can create more confusion than ever before.
Absolutely. And I think it's great that you mentioned this because normally I just want to talk about a class that I teach. I call it sales technology, but it's
Right.
called sales technology. But I think, tell me if I'm right in doing this, because what I'm hearing from you is that there are different steps in the buying process, right? So essentially, there's
Right.
different stages in the buying process, and essentially, a salesperson cannot get involved in all the steps, mostly because the cost of sale is going to become prohibitive. So,
Well, I'm not sure I totally agree with that. I think it is possible for sellers to, first of all, there's this prevailing school of wisdom that, well, buyers are going to go out and do their own research. They're going to
yeah,
get more than halfway through. So I will simply aggressively wait by the telephone,
yeah,
or aggressively wait for by my inbox and wait for the leads to come in. And that, that doesn't work very well. I mean, that's why we have functions like business development
yeah,
representatives and sales development reps
yeah,
who do that kind of work. I mean, it is possible to engage with people very early in what we call a latent state, where they're not aware that they can do
yeah.
something their way, or they're aware but they don't quite know what to do, and whatever. And if I can engage with those buyers early in their buyer journey, actually I have the highest chance of winning that business, because all solutions that they evaluate against are going to be compared to mine. Okay.
Absolutely. But actually, what I was trying to say was that I think I completely agree with you on what I say. But what I say is that when I say sellers, I'm not talking about the sales organization, which
Uh,
includes the sales and marketing component. I'm only talking about an external sales rep. And I think what we try to say is that, at least in the class, and I talk about technology, it's a class on sales technology, but I talk about things like marketing automation and
yes.
account-based marketing, which can be used in hand with an SDR or an inside sales rep before getting an external sales rep kind of involved. I'm not saying that's true all the time, but it has an impact on your cost of sale, your ability to reach out to a broader audience that might be interested. And now I'm talking now of the sales organization, not the selling organization. When I mean sales
Yep.
organization, I'm talking about marketing and sales. And essentially, but what I think is interesting there is the same content that has to be relevant to get the attention of the people in the latent stage will of course be a kind of a subset of what you'll need to have to go in depth at a later point in time. Because what I'm trying to say there is your sales enablement is not restricted to the content that you push to your salespeople, but it should also be part of your content management system that uses it to populate your marketing automation.
Yeah.
And of course, and depending upon when you're using your marketing automation, it can be used to trigger an action that could be followed up by a sales rep. Because for me, that is what people, in my opinion, tend to forget about sales enablement. It is also about, yes, when I'm having that conversation with my customer, I need to make sure that I can kind of personalize it according to the person that I'm talking to. Therein goes in the fact that you could have new people jumping in, but if marketing has done its homework, then marketing can say, okay, assuming you're in this kind of customer segment, if you get
Right.
this profile, it's highly likely that they may be looking for this particular kind of content, but you could already kind of populate it by creating your account-based management strategies based on very specific things. Am I right in understanding how this should actually work?
No, I think your model is sound, and I think it really all starts with, again, who are the buyer constituencies that we sell?
Absolutely. Indeed.
What is the journey that they go through to make decisions about the kinds of capabilities we provide? And if we all agree on what that map looks like, and if you really think about it, what we're really doing is we are defining, it's the mirror image of the ultimate customer experience, right?
Absolutely.
We think of customer experience as what we do to add value in how we interact with a buyer. If that's mapped to the buyer preferences and their preferred buyer journey, then we have something that works really, really well. Okay?
Absolutely.
And there, these enablement tools and technologies, account-based marketing strategies, et cetera, if they're mapped to the buyer journey in a way that becomes part of our customer experience, then it feels natural to the buyer. If it feels like it's overwhelming, or we're just carpet bombing them with information, or if it's not relevant to where they are in their buyer journey, then it's a bad customer experience by definition. So I totally agree with that. I will tell you one thing that we talked about at Sales 3.0 conference. We've been doing a lot of work here at SPI at one of the critical parts that most salespeople get wrong today. And that is, at some point, a buyer is going to want to have a conversation with someone that's going to to help them create a vision of a good solution or refine a vision of a solution so they can make a decision. And we find that the majority of salespeople do that very badly.
Yeah.
You know, they're walking, talking brochures. So what I'm finding now with conversation AI analytic tools, things like Kong or Chorus AI, that talks about the tone and structure of conversations. But what they don't really talk about is what the content of those conversations
should be. Yeah.
We've been doing some work with creating those messages as part of that buyer journey definition so that I, as a salesperson in a safe space, can practice those conversations.
Indeed.
Basically going, using a bot, if you will, an automated bot to get good at them, but then also to create conversations about how I'm going to help or add value or solve this particular customer problem in a way that I feel comfortable. And so we've developed a tool called Conversation Genius that does that really well. We also have some solution messaging automated tools today. Automation is really helping salespeople to become much more comfortable at representing a broader portfolio of solutions and to know how to have those conversations.
Fantastic.
Get a customer to a decision faster, and that's very exciting.
And I think Tim, you kind of stole my thunder, by the way, Tim, because that was actually the question I was coming up to, because you see that fact with companies like Gong.io and then Chorus AI,
right,
and stuff like that. That's pretty much in terms of conversations. Then you have ScaleX talking about things like how to do those calls and kind of stuff. But I think it's very, very interesting that what you're saying is normally what we teach in a normal sales class, that is how do you deal with objections? Because at the end of the day, what you're talking about is, I can talk a lot about, okay, here are my features, here are my benefits, here are the advantages, to the point where you actually have to go in for the close.
Right.
What is amazing is things have not changed a lot. That it's what separates the good salespeople from the average ones is their ability to close, except that right now, with so many different stakeholders, knowing when to close and having a kind of, how do I deal with the kind of objections as is, why should I do it now? Why should I do it now? I mean, why should I do it? Why should I do it at all? Why should I do it now? Why should I do it with you? Becomes all the more critical to truly see whether you can close the deal or not. And it typically goes into, again, objection handling. That's where I like your Conversation Genius, because assuming that you are mapping and you're tracking all of the conversations that you've had based on the past, can we now use AI to try and see, AI or automation tool, whatever it is, to try and see how to practice? Of course, I'm assuming that once you have enough number of, enough number of objections that you've had, or in your case, since you're developing a training tool, you've heard from your customers,
right?
Then people can then go ahead in your sales enablement platforms to practice and do kind of peer coaching, because which I thought was one of the really cool things when I had a conversation with Saleshood. I don't know if you know Eli Cohen, so essentially one of the people, and he talked about a lot about peer coaching and peer mentoring. And I think going back to what you said, the beauty of your Conversation Genius is much more about closing the deal, but then practicing it with your AI-enabled bots, and then passing it on. Again, I can then easily imagine then my colleagues can then take a look at it and say how they would do it differently.
Yeah.
Is that something that you see? Yeah.
Yeah, I see that as a real trend. And I'll also say, you talk about objection handling. I think that is important. That is an important part. But the part of the conversation that we see that people really struggle with is understanding where the buyer is in their journey, what their particular pain point is, or what their potential missed opportunity is, and then being able to ask insightful questions or provide insights that to help them create a vision about the kind of capabilities that they would now be able to do better or new or different, so they have a clear vision of what their world would be like. That's how you overcome objections come from a lack of clarity about how I'm going to create value from whatever it is you're offering, or it's from a concern about financial risk. Is this really am I get enough value out of this? Operational risk, does it really work the way that you say it does, right? Or the most important one that's overlooked is transitional risk. I mean, how do I get from where you are now to this wonderful that you're talking about? How do I overcome those kinds of things? And if we can help sellers to collaborate with customers effectively, and we have some specific tools that help people to define what that collaboration ideally would look like for that customer, we call it a collaboration plan, not a very original name. In conjunction with this kind of conversation genius concept to help me know how to position that in a way that feels consultative and value add to me as a buyer.
Absolutely.
The difference, I think, between sellers out there today who are really just, the vast majority, unfortunately, are still pitching products or pitching features and talking about functions and maybe even benefits, okay? But, and hoping that it sticks. Being able to tailor that to unique situations that, again, is aligned with that buyer's particular journey is really the key to creating an optimal customer experience. And having this person say, finally, I'm talking to someone who's a real expert and understands me, and this is all about me, and I can get to where myself and my organization need to get. So that is a huge difference. And I'm trying to see now with the tools that are and the automation that's available today to make it possible for sellers to build those proficiencies much more effectively and faster.
Well, I love the answer, because one of the things I specifically focus on the closing part of it, but you're right, because in a sales process, every step is a kind of a mini close, right? In order for you to go to the next stage in the process. And I particularly focus on that part when it's, again, focusing much more on, I think it was Gartner, because now everything seems to be Gartner, right? So Gartner or Sirius, I think between Gartner and Sirius Decisions, they have the market covered. Forrester, okay, 3 of them. That talks about the fact that, 50-60% of more complex sales decisions, buying decisions are not made. And again, that goes into your idea of the transitional risk, because I'm thinking that even if your sales enablement tool and everything else, and you've aligned it perfectly well, your salespeople are trained to use that, but you could still forget that part where the biggest thing, it could be the transitional risk. And that gets into the closing. That could pretty much what could be like something that comes in the cog in the wheel at the last part when you want to close it. And essentially that's where I personally think as well is in these kind of complex deals, like the conversation guide that you have is going to help them, assuming that they've done the parts before that well. Because I think that is pretty much where they really have to convince that final 2 or 3 from 6.8, it could boil down to the 2 or 3 people now have to make, because they will have to bear the brunt of the risk, right? Saying that, there were 8 people involved, but at the end of the day, it's the CEO or the key decision maker who might have an egg on their face if this does not work out. So I think that is pretty much where I love the idea of the conversation genius, where you can practice against mock situations. And the platform, first of all, because it takes a look at all the previous other kinds of conversations you've had, and then actually has an interactive talk with you, but you could record it, share it with your colleagues in your platform, and that makes it possible. And I think that's very, very powerful. Kind of as a last step. It's never a last step, right? Because we can get into customer success and business. So we're not even going to get into that. But I think it's really interesting that how aligning yourself to a buying process has ramifications for your whole sales organization, all the way from what kind of marketing content, when should marketing get involved, what kind of sales conversation should we be having, and if I know exactly who are the different constituents, as you said, how is the platforms then going to come in and help us do that?
Right.
Last but not the least is that it's just not platforms which are just reacting to what you're doing, but increasingly a very, very proactive, interactive kind of training conversations which we could actually have salespeople go through to help them being successful to align different steps as well. So go ahead.
I totally agree with that. And I think that a lot of clients that we work with, they have a sales process, but it tends to be in reaction to buyer behavior. They totally miss the front end of the buyer journey, where they go from a latent state to what are the triggers that cause them to take action and evaluate solutions and so forth. And then also, in the last phase, if you will, in terms of managing these kinds of transitional and other risks, the buyer journeys tend to be very incomplete, or their understanding of buyer journeys tends to be very incomplete. And as a result, then their sales process definitions tend to be very incomplete and very inconsistent with where buyers are when they approach different states. Or when they engage with buyers at different states. So I think there's a lot of bad assumptions that are made about, we understand our customers and we know how to service them. But I think if you can really step back and be objective about it and understand how your different buyer constituencies go through the process of making the decisions even from a very early latent state. And that's going to help inform what kind of resources you need, what kind of organizational structure you need, what kind of data you need, what kind of automated support do you need, how many and what level and what types of salespeople do you need. All of that is dictated by mapping out what that buyer journey looks like, or what our journeys might look like if you offer different solutions to different people.
And for me, that's really what I really liked about your topic, is that it sounds so simple. It sounds like, wait a minute, isn't this something that we've been talking around for years? But
it seems obvious, doesn't it?
Yeah. but the impact it has on some of the things that we teach in our sales programs,
right,
is becoming more and more relevant in terms of saying how everything is interconnected to these things. I can easily imagine the impact this has on the sales management process in terms of understanding what should be the profile of teams that we have. If it's going to be 6.8 people, should I be now allocating more resources to bringing in new people with different profiles? Should I be looking at hybrid sales structures? We're not even touching that yet. We're just talking about the sales process, but the sales management process, which, by the way, is something that we have had a chance to talk with Tamara Schenk and other people as well, is the biggest enabler that they talk about, especially in all this, is actually the sales manager. And how can we enable them with the right kind of content? And I'm sure that based on what I'm hearing you say, is that because in the time that we have, you talked about this, but it also has implications on the sales manager and the sales organization as a whole as well.
I agree. In fact, I don't know how a manager can truly manage a sales team, either, at the top level or a first level sales manager, or anything in between, unless you have a map of what good looks like. If you have some standard of excellence by which to evaluate where we are in this account or opportunity, or where this person is struggling or doing well, unless we have some kind of standard, and that standard needs to be based on those buyer preferences. They need to be based on those buyer journeys. Because the organization that understands and aligns with those buyer journeys the quickest and the best are the ones that win the vast majority of business. And frankly, most of their business comes not from defeating certain competitors, which is helpful, it does happen, but it comes from actually bringing in more customers to a buying decision.
Indeed, absolutely. Okay. That's wonderful. And I think one of the things that's all the time that we have right now, but what I would really like to do at a later date, if of course Tim is willing to come back and talk to our audience, of course, is actually the next part of it is actually something that I want to really pick your brain on, because you're an organization that is big on training.
Yes.
And I would really like to also understand the impact this change in the sales process and the selling process has on the skills that you look for in people, and not to mention skills that you already have, but skills that you need to upskill, and the concept of onboarding. And I believe the new word that I'm hearing a lot more is reboarding, that is more for existing people, that in terms of they call it reboarding. So essentially, it would be very interesting to pick your brains on how, from a training perspective, what this has, both from a viewpoint of the content wise, but also in technology, and how technology is helping in the training process and customizing learning journeys for your salespeople. Huh?
Absolutely, huge implications. I'm happy to discuss that. We've been doing a lot of forward thinking on the implications of competency development of sales organizations. So delighted to chat about that.
Absolutely. Thank you so much again, Tim, for taking time off your busy schedule. And thank you everyone for tuning in. And again, we hope to have Tim again on the show, if you could call it that. But stay tuned for one of our next webinars as well. Thank you.
Thank you.